In this section, we're going to create the lightning bolt, which is the final piece of our lightning attack. As you recall, the lightning bolt is the line that extends from the player to the enemy, delivering the electric shock. The lightning bolt itself is actually a fairly complex object, requiring many things to achieve its visual effect. It needs a light, it needs a particle system, and a line renderer, all that will work together to build this convincing attack effect. So let's see how we create this. Even though the lightning bolt will eventually be nested underneath the lightning attack, I'm going to start by creating it as a separate game object. Also, unlike my other particle effects, I'm going to start by creating this as an empty game object. I'm going to go to the hierarchy view and click Create, Create Empty. I'm going to name this Lightning Bolt. The easiest part of the lightning bolt is the one I'm going to add first. That's the light. I'm going to click Add Component, Rendering, Light. I want this to be a point light, and I'm going to leave pretty much everything about this the same, except I'm going to change its intensity from 1 to 1.5. Lightning tends to be a fairly bright event. Next, I'm going to add the particle system, and I'm going to do that by clicking Add Component, Effects, Particle System. Now I'm going to set up this particle system fairly quickly. I'm going to change its duration from 5 seconds to 1 second. I do want this to loop. I also am going to check pre-warm, which basically means that when this particle system starts, it should start with particles already spawned as if it had already been running. Next, I'm going to change the start lifetime of the particles to be 0.15. I want their speed to be 0.1. And I'm going to give them a start rotation that is a random between two constants. I want those numbers to be -90, 90. I'm going to change the scaling mode to be shape. I'm going to change the emission to emit 30 particles as opposed to 10. I also don't want any shape so that they all spawn right in the middle. I'm going to add a size over lifetime module by clicking the plus icon in the upper right hand corner and choosing size over lifetime. For the size over lifetime, I want to go from 0 to 2 very quickly and then slowly shrink over the rest of the life. Again, I'm going to pop the preview window open, and I can do that by right clicking on the top of the preview bar. That'll pop it up into a larger preview window. That just makes it easier to work when I'm doing more detailed work with curves. I'm going to change its size to be between 0 and 2 instead of 1. I want the particle size to be 0 initially. And then I want it to quickly grow all the way up to 2 by about 15% of its life. Then, by the end of its life, I want it to drop down to about 1.4. I want it to be a very sharp transition when it first gets to the value of 2. So I'm going to right click on that keyframe, and I'm going to choose Broken. This is going to allow me to move each side independently. Now I can create a very sharp transition right as the size reaches its maximum. Now that I'm done with this curve window, I'm just going to click the X, and that's going to put it back down at the bottom of the inspector. The last thing I'm going to change is the renderer. Namely, I'm going to give it a different material and texture. I'm going to do that by clicking the circle selector next to the material name, and I'm going to choose the Hit Spark material. If I want to see this a little bit better, I can turn off that light gizmo by clicking the gizmos drop down in the scene view and clicking the little light bulb next to the light. That's going to be the center or source of our lightning bolt. Now the actual bolt itself is handled by a line renderer. A line renderer does pretty much what its name implies. It renders a line. It allows us to designate a start and end position, but we can also specify several vertices in between to make the line have corners. I'm going to add a line renderer by clicking Add Component, Effects, Line Renderer. Now there's a few things I want to change on the default line renderer. For instance, I don't really need it to cast shadows. It's a lightning bolt after all. I also don't need it to receive shadows. I'm going to change its materials. Right now it has no material, and I'm going to click the circle selector near the material property, and I'm going to choose Zap Beam Additive, the same we did for our lightning hit effect. Next, I'm going to expand parameters. I could set up positions, but we don't really know any yet because we haven't created a lightning bolt. Under parameters, I'm going to set its start width to be 0.6 and its end width to be 0.3. Also, its start color is going to be a very solid blue. With that done, I can go ahead and add my lightning bolt script. I'm going to add the lightning bolt script by clicking Add Component, Scripts, Lightning Bolt Script. The lightning bolt script is responsible for rendering out this line renderer in phases. The tricky part about getting an effect that looks like an actual lightning bolt is that lightning bolts really don't have a consistent shape. They warp between several different types of zigzagging or bent or broken lines very, very quickly. We're going to call those phases. So let's look at some of the properties we're going to use to create these phases. Now on the lightning bolt properties themselves in the inspector, we have a few we want to look at. The first is ray height, which is basically how high off the ground this lightning bolt is going to be. Right now the value is 2, which is completely adequate. This of course assumes that our floor is at 0 on the y-axis. If your floor is higher or lower, you're going to want to change this value. Next we have the effect duration. How long does the total lightning bolt live? Since our other particle effects live 0.75 seconds, our bolt will also live 0.75 seconds. Next, we have our phase duration, or how long does each phase last? Remember, a phase is basically a unique shape of our lightning bolt. Currently it's set to 0.1, but we want this to warp very quickly, so we're going to change it to 0.01. The next property is for the line renderer itself. It needs to know where the line renderer is. I can set that by simply clicking on the line renderer component right above it and dragging it down to that property. The next part's the tricky one, and it's the one where you can feel free to get as creative as you want. This is where we're actually going to come up with a graphical representation of what we want this line to look like. I'm going to start by setting the size of this ray phases collection to 1. And I'm going to see that I get an animation curve. The ray phases variable is actually an array of animation curves. So if I click in this curve, I get the animation curve window. I'm going to start by clicking on the straight line preset. I then want this line to bounce back and forth not around 1, but 0. I can use my mouse wheel to scroll out or zoom out so I can see this a little bit better. I'm going to move the starting point of this line down to 0. And I'm going to move the ending point also down to 0. Now don't worry that I'm not exactly on 0 or that it's so far zoomed out. I'm actually now just going to close this window and reopen it, and it's going to recenter everything for me. So here we go. I want it to start about 0, and I want it to end at 1 with a value of about 0. From here, I'm going to start adding keyframes and just sort of building a lightning bolt. I can sort of get as crazy with this as I want. Once I have a general shape that I want, I'm just going to right click on each of these and say broken. I'm going to keep going down the line doing this. I really want there to be sharp contrasts. Now I could spend a lot of time doing this in a very concise way, and as a matter of fact, it's already provided for you like this if you'd like to use the reference. Let's go ahead over to our VFX Reference Prefabs folder. And in here we'll see a lightning bolt game object. And I'll click and drag one into my scene. Now I'll see it has the same light and the same particle effect. And if I look at the lightning bolt script, you will see the different phases already created. This was the work of a VFX artist who came in here and made these very different lightning bolt animation curves. Each one of these is fairly random and unique, which is going to make the lightning bolt look very realistic. Apart from these ray phases animation curves, both of these lightning bolt visual effects are exactly the same. So as you're following along with this step, you can either use the lightning bolt from the VFX reference prefabs folder, or you can get creative and build your own ray phases to be exactly the way you want. To save time, I'm going to go ahead and finish constructing this lightning attack with the pre-made lightning bolt prefab. Before I do that, I'm going to take the lightning bolt I just created and save that into my prefabs folder. I'm going to go to my prefabs folder and then the subfolder VFX. I'm going to click and drag the lightning bolt game object from the hierarchy down to the project window. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete it from my scene. To show the completed effect, I'm going to click and drag the lightning bolt prefab object that was already made at the start of this down onto my lightning attack game object. I'm then going to reset its transform position by right-clicking on the transform component and choosing reset. And then I'm going to go ahead and disable it, since we don't start shooting lightning. Now I'm going to click on the lightning attack game object and look for the lightning attack script. I can see under weapon references it's looking for a lightning bolt, so I'm going to click and drag the lightning bolt game object onto it. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit play. I can see now that I shoot lightning and hit my enemy. 2 hits and the enemy dies. Each enemy has 100 health, and each lightning attack does 50 damage, and so it's just a matter of simple math. We can also see what happens if our lightning bolt hits something else in the scene. We can even see what happens if our lightning bolt misses completely. At this point, we have our lightning attack completely made. In the next section, we're going to go ahead and integrate it into our main scene.